Welcome, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. Today we'll take a look at the campaigns and candidates for San Jose City Council in the upcoming June election with two sharp observers of local politics. Ramona Giwargis is the City Hall reporter for the Mercury News, and Steve Wymer is Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications at TiVo. He's also on the board of directors of Team San Jose, as well as Work to Future. Of course, Steve and Ramona will be speaking for themselves today and not for these organizations. I think you'll be interested in what they have to say. We'll also hear what some of our viewers are looking for in a city council member, and then we'll close with the second part of our interview with Rod Diridon. Today, we'll learn about Rod's time on the County Board of Supervisors, including his battles over urban sprawl and gay rights. All this next on Valley Politics. Welcome everyone, and welcome Steve Wymer and Ramona Giwargis. 5 council seats in San Jose up for election this coming June and probably November for the runoffs. Why is this significant? Why is having 5 council seats up significant?
Yeah, well, I think just in my time covering City Hall, what we've seen is the new mayor, Sam Liccardo, trying very hard to build a coalition, right? Trying to build a majority so that he can push his agenda, and he's managed to do that.
He's done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, he's done a very good job of that, and you can kind of see where the loyalty lies, although, you know, folks have said that the business-labor divide is not quite as apparent with this council. They seem to work together a lot more. You can still see it when it comes to, for example, the vote about the commercial impact fee, you know, to charge businesses, new businesses coming into the city, a fee, right, for affordable housing. That was, I believe, a 7-4 vote, and you can kind of see where that divide happens. So with 5 new seats, or 5 seats up for grabs, and 3 brand new people coming on the council, you can see that power balance kind of teeter in one direction or the other. So I think it's really important for Sam to be able to maintain the seats that he has, and hopefully win a few more to kind of have more than just a 6-5 to be able to
allies.
to be able to build his coalition and push his agenda as a mayor.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think it is a credit to the mayor for narrowing the gap between business and labor, that was what has been so-called the gap between business and labor. So that has been an interesting thing to watch throughout the first couple of years here. But I think also you have a really interesting dynamic where you're sort of teeing up for what will inevitably be a really big race locally 2.5 years from now, where the mayor will stand for re-election presumably, and the dynamics could shift even further, and additional revenue measures may be in the works. So I think you have a convergence of many factors, one being just 3 potential brand new people to the council, which can have a material impact, but also a lot of just the distraction of campaigns and fundraising and having 5 races open. Plus that sort of tee up for the next big, I guess what they would, in a local level, would be a mayoral cycle, which will obviously draw a lot more attention. So.
Yeah, this could shift the balance of liberal, conservative, labor, business on the council. But there's been another division I've been observing the last couple of years, and that's between council members who want to focus on what they call core services, charter services, streets, police, fire, library, and not do other stuff.
Right.
And Sam's in the majority that wants to do other things because they see them as related to public safety or whatever. So it's kind of another cut, and there are candidates running in these districts that could shift that balance a bit as well. We're not going to talk about Districts 4 and District 10 very much. District 4 is Berryessa, and the incumbent is Mon Nguyen, and he does have a challenger, but my prediction is he's in pretty solid shape to win. In District 10 is Johnny Camus, that's Almaden. Again, I expect him to win in June. So we're going to focus on District 2, which is Edenvale, District 6, which is Willow Glen, and District 8, which is Evergreen. Interestingly, all of these districts have substantial Democratic majorities, 50 to 55%, only about 23, 24% Republican in any of the districts. But of course, this is a nonpartisan election, so those party labels don't go on the ballot, but we'll talk about how they could have an effect in some of the races. Most of them, there are 18 candidates altogether. I think all these races are sufficiently competitive that they'll probably go to a runoff in November. If nobody gets over 50% of the vote, that goes to runoff. There's one where I think that could happen, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So what I want to kind of think about is who are the most likely to, in each of the seats, to get to that runoff. Let's start with District 2. That's the Edenvale area, South San Jose. There are 4 candidates there. My perception is the leading candidates are Sergio Jimenez and Elias Portales. What are you two hearing or seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are fair predictions, but I think that you don't want to count out Joe Lopez just
Really?
yet. I've gotten an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about his background, and I think that he could be kind of that candidate.
He was a
that
deputy
we don't
sheriff,
expect.
right?
Right,
Retired
he was a deputy
sheriff.
From what I read, he was a gang member at one point in his life. He reformed his life. He's a retired sergeant. So I think that there could be kind of a contest there. And most recently, Elias Portales had some information come to light about him being suspended by the
this
state
is an
bar.
attorney, as an attorney.
Correct. He's an attorney,
Suspended
so he
by
was
the
suspended
state
by
bar,
the state bar.
yeah.
So I think if that comes up during the runoff and potentially brought up by his opponent, that could do some damage. While it was public information, it's certainly something that could hurt him, and this is the second time that he's been suspended. So I think Sergio has a great chance of making it, but now the question for me is it going to be Joe he's going to battle, or is it going to be
Really?
Elias? And Sergio raised the most money too, so that's worth noting.
It's interesting with our city council here, if I can think back just over the last 4 or 5 years, plus things that get dredged up over and over again, there's certainly a long history of the media focusing on some of the sort of indiscretions of and ethical lapses of some of our members of the city council. And not that isn't an appropriate thing for the public to put their focus on, and character issues, fundraising violations, campaign violations. This is something that's a great frustration to a lot of civic leaders, and I put myself in this camp because it does exactly what potentially 18 candidates running for the council has the chance to do the other opposite of, and that is interest the average citizens in the process. And so it's frustrating because it's both the public's right to know these things, and the public should have eyes wide open as they go to cast these votes, but it also feels like the easy low-hanging fruit for the media to really feast upon, about whether or not somebody was late on a filing deadline.
I would
and so
completely disagree.
I'm hoping that we're able to get past sort of that these don't put a hindering, a damper on the public's interest in this race.
Right.
Because I really want the public to be more interested.
If the media doesn't bring it up, the opponents will. And Steve touched on it. I don't agree with you, but you touched on one good point, and that was that the public has a right to know, and it's our job to make sure that they do know. Now, hopefully we can move past that and get to the issues, but certainly when people are casting their vote on June 7th, the character matters. What that person did matters. And so
I think part of the problem is we're a little thin on media around here.
That's right.
So the Mercury News is, understaffed.
Yeah.
And it's become a pretty thin newspaper. Television tends not to cover local politics at all.
Radio's
so
in trouble.
people have to watch Valley Politics or read their weeklies. In some of the neighborhoods, not all of our neighborhoods get a weekly.
There's some online reporting, but
yeah.
Yes, there's certainly a lack of any, especially for the 10th largest metro in the country. There's
Absolutely.
both a small amount of media
Yeah.
and a media that I think can rightly be accused of being a little biased at times as well. Which most newspapers are. Every sense of media, you're a fine journalist such as yourself has a small amount of bias, so I think we all do. Even
Steve.
a citizen.
Steve.
I know, shocker.
Please.
But to my point broader is that there's such limited ink. There's such limited bandwidth and attention span of the public. And I'm not suggesting, please don't misunderstand, I'm not suggesting that a person who's running to be a public servant isn't obligated to uphold the highest ethical standards, especially when it comes to a behavior that very much dictates whether or not the public would maybe want to entrust them to hold that office.
Right.
I'm just lamenting the lack of attention that the bigger picture gets when the limited ink goes to things like, I don't really care if Elias Portales was suspended.
We could talk about Journalism 101 over a cup of coffee, Steve. I think we're here to talk about the elections.
Yeah, let's get back to, do you have anything on district you want to say about the candidates for District 2?
I think 2 and 8, unlike 6, will be the districts where shoe leather wins the race. I don't think
Yeah.
that will win it in 6. I kind of have an interesting, unique perspective on 6 being a residence there. But
We'll get to that
in the
in a
other
minute.
2,
Yeah.
I think it'll be the person who knocks on the most doors.
My impression is that it's Sergio Jimenez, who's doing the most door-to-door campaigning
Yeah.
in that district. I think there's an outside chance that somebody could win that without a runoff.
Yeah.
But I wasn't
And
taking.
would he be your pick?
He's because of the shoe leather.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also
He's
great
working hard.
credentials, and there are a lot of candidates in these districts that have paid their dues with neighborhood associations, city commissions, and so on. Sergio's one of them, but there are several in the other districts and amongst the 18. But I wasn't taking Joe Lopez as seriously as Ramona says we should, so that's an
We'll
interesting
see
point.
after
Let's get to District 6. So Ramona, what's going on there?
Well, District 6 is interesting. It's dynamic. It's kind of been my favorite one to watch so far because you've got these candidates that all are very well established. They have roots in the community. They grew up in the community. They raised families in the community. They sat on different boards of neighborhood associations, city commissions. So you've got a lot of kind of household names, which I think is going to help. There have been a few surprises in that race, just from my observations. And one thing is Norm Klein. I think people, when he threw his name in the hat, people just kind of assumed that he's the establishment candidate. He's going to get
And
the
he was
business
immediately
endorsement.
endorsed by the mayor and the county
Correct.
assessor, among others.
That's right, Jeff Rosen, our DA.
Yeah.
So he certainly came in, sort of with that strong impression. And what we're hearing now, some folks are saying that he's going to be challenged by Dev Davis, who raised the most money this quarter, and basically has kind of been infringing on some of that business vote, if you will.
She got the
earned
chamber
of
endorsement?
Commerce
Yeah.
endorsement. That's right. And I also think the other surprising candidate has been Eric Fong. I think when he announced last year, a lot of us kind of discounted that this guy may not have a lot of political experience. He's a manager at Apple. Is he going to be able to pull this off? And thus far, he's raised the most money, $80,000.
He's kind of the millennial candidate, I think, and he
Yes.
has access to a fundraising base that the other candidates don't.
And
Is
he's
that, you mean
been-
in a digital sense?
In a digital sense, just in terms of age and the constituency that he reaches.
Tech workers?
Yeah.
Right. And he's also very well spoken at the candidate forums that I've had a chance to attend. He tends to kind of give a different answer than the others, and I think when you have that many candidates running, what's really going to register with voters is how they set themselves apart.
Yeah.
What is different about you? Why should I mark my ballot with your name and not the other 7 that are vying for my vote? And I think Councilman Pierluigi Oliveira, whether you agree with his politics or you don't, I think he set the bar really high as far as being an accessible councilman. He's at 7 o'clock on a Sunday, he'll email a constituent
emails you back, yeah.
Right? So I think whoever takes over that seat has to be prepared to kind of keep that going.
Well, it's a very demanding district. Rose Garden,
Yeah.
Shasta Hanchett, Willow Glen.
Very plugged in.
Engaged, very demanding. Steve, you live in the district, so what do you see going on?
I do, and I would agree with Ramona's assessment. I think the current councilman is extremely accessible. He has a reputation for being available at any time, anywhere.
Also not afraid to tell you what he thinks.
Not afraid to tell you what he thinks. I think, and to Ramona's point about Dev Davis, I don't think it's possible that she's challenging Norm Klein. I think she's beating him.
Yeah.
I think she's beating him off of work ethic. I think she's beating him
Yeah.
because she's extremely thoughtful. And it's ironic because she's breaking sort of the mold too, in the sense that you brought up the point of the community forums. When you have 6 or 8 candidates up there, everybody's sort of thinking, while the candidates aren't even listening to each other, they're just thinking about what they're going to say and how long they can capture the airtime when the mic sort of shifts to them. And Dev Davis has sort of taken a different attack. I noticed when she answers questions, she cites statistics. Now she's a researcher, right? So
Yeah.
this fits. But I think that's appreciated in our district.
That
and I
district,
think
yeah.
a lot of people, they don't care if you were on a, and I don't think you meant it this way, but I don't think that being on a planning commission or a library board, I don't think that sways. It does show your experience.
Right.
It helps you sort of define that you have a track record of customer service and constituent services, but I don't think it matters as much to the soccer mom or the stay-at-home dad or the guy walking his dog as it does the person who's really thoughtful. For example, the road diet is a hot issue on Lincoln Avenue
Yeah.
in Willow Glen. And Dev Davis, every other candidate has really strong opinions about it. I think most of them, if I remember correctly, except one, support it. But Deb Davis's answer doesn't start with a subjective opinion. It starts with she wants to go study some DOT logs or Department of Transportation study or something, and that's a nice way to sort of dial down some of the emotional sort of reactions to things. And it seems to be really appreciated. I also think she's knocking on a lot of doors. So it'll be interesting to watch. I think she's an interesting surprise.
She's the Republican in that field of 8 candidates.
There's 2. There's Myron.
But she's the endorsed
She's the endorsed
Republican,
one.
endorsed by the Republican Party. And if they put some resources into it, if that district is like 23% Republican, but 23% of the vote will get you into the runoff. So if she can build on that and do the rest that she's doing. Now Helen Chapman's also in the race. She's endorsed by the Democratic Party and by Labor, so Labor's walking for her. She's a passionate walker as well. And Peter Allen, also endorsed by the Democratic Party, old family. So it's a hot contest. Who are your picks to be the top 2?
I'm going to pick Deb Davis and Norm Klein. That's my safe guess.
Ramona, you got a pick?
Goodness. Oh.
While you're thinking, I'm going with Deb Davis and Helen Chapman.
Actually, I was going to say Helen Chapman is top 2 for me as well. And Deb Davis.
We were looking at the campaign finance reports. I totaled up the loans in this campaign. Not just for District 6, but the candidates have loaned themselves $143,000.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And you know what? If you don't make the runoff, it's very hard to pay yourself your loan back. So some of these people better be prepared to take a personal loss. We're almost out of time, but we got to talk quickly about Evergreen, District 8, another contested race, some interesting candidates. You have a view of on at least one of the candidates, right, Steve?
So I think this is for essentially citywide, very unknowns, right? I mean, we wouldn't say, they certainly don't have as Ramona states, household name firepower that you would think in D6, right? Generally speaking, stereotype, but I think it's true. So this is my district. This is my pick for shoe leather winning of all the areas, and it's a difficult geographic district to do. You have a lot of sort of very different areas of the district, and so it'll be interesting to see how those sort of each individual precinct turns out with vote. You have a diverse makeup culturally, racially in the district, and it'll be interesting to see how the votes split along there. I think Jimmy Nguyen's I know he's working really hard. I don't know if it'll be enough. I saw a poll that showed mixed results, and of course you have your chamber endorses and your labor endorsement. But I know he's working hard, and I think it's going to be an interesting race.
This is the district with the biggest Asian population, so that could be a strong base for him, because you got to get to the runoff. You got to have some core vote. What do you think, Ramona?
But he's run previously. And
he has run previously.
So I think
Nguyen is a well-known name in this town.
Well, there's 2 of them on the council.
Yes.
Unrelated, as the Mercury.
We have to put it. So, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. I also think, though, Pat Waite has raised a lot of money. He has name recognition, as we've already talked about. He ran before. He's the Republican candidate in that contest. And the other one that hasn't been mentioned is Denise Belisle. She owns Evergreen Coffee Company. She's got a lot of roots in the community, local base. So I think that's
endorsed
one
by the
to
chamber,
watch
I believe.
as well.
Yeah, endorsed by the chamber and former Mayor Reed.
So it's one to watch.
The candidate I would say to watch is Josh Bruce. Young, not as experienced as some of these others. Labor endorsed, Democratic Party endorsed, and he has a really strong base of volunteers and is doing a lot of the shoe leather stuff that I think we all agree is so important in a city council race.
And worked for Ash Colra, so he knows the city hall dynamics too.
Yeah.
But is this? Do you think the state legislative race will impact this in some way too? I feel like that's an overlay, because I know people are double walking, right, with both people, 2 different people's lit. That always seems kind of weird to me. If somebody comes to my house and asks for my vote and then gives me a flyer for another person, I'm kind of thinking.
I think that's not very effective, because it kind of confuses the message. So the state legislative candidates in that district are partnering, and the labor is partnering. I'm sure the chamber is, where they can with candidates. But it's always much better if somebody comes to your door and they're for this candidate, and here's why, and they pronounce the name of the candidate correctly.
Or even better if it's the candidate himself.
Even better. Well, Ramona, Steve, we're out of time. I can't believe it. This was great.
That was fun.
Thank you both very much. Yeah, great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Now let's hear what some of our followers on Facebook said they're looking for in a city council candidate. Knowledge, community experience, budget and fiscal understanding, Candidates with a long history of community involvement, a vision for growth, willing to tackle tough issues like homelessness or Measure B with a stated opinion rather than just safe verbal neutrality. Someone with a clear commitment to the area and the constituents they serve. Candidates who listen and bring their constituents' voice to the campaign and who take a stand on controversial issues, not trying to stay neutral to win broad support and then go with the politically popular choice. Another viewer said, I want somebody who is forward-thinking, somebody who looks at important issues such as urban planning and the environment. Another said, someone who doesn't say one thing to you in their office and then votes the opposite way on the dais. Someone who cares about working people. Another viewer said, I'm looking for candidates who love Coyote Valley. I want the leadership of San Jose to celebrate and work to protect this incredible place. Collaboration. We need people who value reaching out to other districts, other cities, and the private sector. We need big thinkers who will have the courage to highlight dysfunctional systems and create ways to correct them, not cast blame about them. Here's the last comment from a viewer. I'd like to see candidates take a long view of how to improve our city, recognizing that there will need to be short-term pain, disruption, and inconvenience to achieve the long-term vision and sustainability. Also, someone who can be a champion for San Jose and demonstrate civic pride. These are just a few of the great comments we got. You can read more on our Facebook page, but next we continue our interview with Rod Diridon, who served as a county supervisor from 1975 to 1995, and who exemplifies many of the qualities our Facebook followers mentioned. Let's take a look. Let's start with how county politics changed while you were in office. Over that, it's a 20-year period, 3 of you as liberal votes to start with.
Well, 2.5.
2.5.
Remember, Dominic was an old, relatively Democrat, but a conservative farming family. And his heart was with the liberal side, but he couldn't vote there because the constituency came down on him like a ton of bricks when he tried to. So when I was elected, there was Dan and I, and then Jerry Steinberg replaced Vic Calvo.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, we had a strong 3-vote majority, and Dom came with us most of the time then. And so we had a 4-vote block, and Sig Sanchez, though conservative,
South County,
was a nice guy.
Yeah.
He didn't raise hell and go crazy. In fact, I used to raise hell and go crazy. And Sig took me aside and he said, you know, kid, when you criticize any member of the board, we all lose face. So don't do it anymore. Well, I kept doing it, and he beat the heck out of me politically, publicly on an occasion, and I learned not to do that anymore. And then when he left a few years later, he left me with the responsibility of keeping peace on the board, and I tried to do that. But let me tell you what happened, answering your question. At the end of the 70s, we had several votes that were life-changing votes for me. The first one was environmental, and it was to stop what was called 4x4 developments. At that time, you couldn't divide a piece of property into more than 4 parcels, and that was a token effort at keeping the farmlands. But the developers got the idea that you divided it by 4, and then you immediately filed the land use maps to divide each one of those
by 4
again, and then again and again, until you had cities on old farms.
Right.
And it was happening all over the valley, so I'm sure we broke the Brown Act back there, but there wasn't much Brown Act then. But we got together and had a vote on one evening. Remember, our votes were televised then. And we had a 4-vote majority on instructing the planning department not to accept any more subdivision map requests. That froze development in the unincorporated area on an evening with no notice. You can do that with 4 votes. You can't do it with 3. And the next day, there were recall petitions out on Dan, Jerry, and myself, and they didn't make it. We were defended by a lot of the population, by the Chamber of Commerce, the Mercury News, the labor unions, the environmental groups, and so on. So the recall didn't go anywhere. But I thought that I would be recalled. There were 1,000 people in the audience from the farming community, farm labor, and so on, that thought that they were defending the farmers. That was one vote. The second vote was the gay rights ordinance. I didn't know much about gay rights. I came from a little community in Northern California that didn't understand what that meant. Came down here, and my instinct for fairness put me on the right side of the issue in favor of the ordinance.
This is 1979 again.
This
right?
is 79, but there was no gay rights ordinance in the state of California at that time. And I was just reelected and getting ready to run for the state senate. In fact, I was running for a vacancy that Jerry Smith was leaving because he was becoming a judge. And I was ambivalent about the ordinance. I knew it was right, but I couldn't get myself to, in effect, sacrifice my career, because that's what I thought I was doing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I did. It was what happened. And so on the night of the ordinance, we had the chambers full, the guest chambers full, and the foyer out clear to the street full of conservative church people, all speaking against the ordinance. I was the chair of the board at the time. And so I had to be the spokesman of the board. And I listened, and I listened, and I listened to 8 hours of public hearings on that issue. At the end of that 8-hour period, I was convinced, absolutely, that this was the right thing to do. I was doing the right thing. And secondly, I was convinced that it was worth sacrificing going to the state senate.
So the opponents persuaded you?
No, I was convinced just by my moral reasoning.
Okay, yeah.
The overwhelming testimony
Yeah.
was against voting for gay rights. There were probably 20 or so people testified in support, and 1,000 who testified in opposition. Oh, maybe more like 400 or 500 who testified in opposition. From the churches telling us we were going to go to hell. Right in the middle of it, an earthquake came, and the pastor from the Los Gatos Christian Church was there. He crawled under the podium, and I suggested that he needn't crawl under the podium if he really believed in God. And so I voted in favor of the ordinance and made a statement that, and I'm an Episcopalian. I taught Sunday school at the time, and I said, my feeling about God is that God isn't going to condemn you for doing something which is legal and proper and is what your heart tells you you need to do. And that was quoted in the headlines of the Mercury News the next day. And that was a defining moment in my political career. From that time forward, I never listened to what the public, very contrary to an old pollster, but I never listened to the public. I reasoned through what was right, and I voted what was right. Did the same thing about several months later on solar, requiring solar photovoltaic and hot water on new homes in the unincorporated area. And a lot of people against that. And we voted for it, first in the state, and then the state preempted us with a more lenient ordinance. But those were defining moments. And that allowed me, from that time forward, not to have to worry about who was supporting or who was opposing, but rather to reason through what was right according to my values, and to do it early so that I could fight for it so I could be a leader.
We'll hear more from Rod Diridon next month when our opening guest will be San Jose's new police auditor. That should be interesting. Meanwhile, you can catch up on previous shows on our website at createtvsj.org or on YouTube. Just search for Create TV San Jose. And now that's all, folks. Thanks for watching Valley Politics today. See you next time.